Hi guys, welcome back to Andrew Andy. Going to have a look today, or talk you through my thoughts on the HTC One versus the Galaxy S4. I've used both for sort of at least a week, the HTC One perhaps even for a little bit longer. And as last year with the HTC One X, I remember thinking to myself, yeah, I can't see how any other phone is going to be any better than this. This will be the phone I keep. This year I wasn't even sure that I'd bother with the S4. Some of the reviews weren't so great. It looks very similar to the S3. But sure enough, when I saw I could get one for $430, I was doing the price, £500. No, that's too much in my opinion for a phone. But when I saw I could get it for $430 from O2, yeah, what the hell, let's give it a go. So I've been able to use both of them, and hopefully I can just help you decide which one's the right phone for you, because they're both very good devices. Some people will suit the HTC One, some people will suit the S4. So I'll try and give you a few pointers that might help you out. So we're going to start off just taking a look at the designs of the two phones. The HTC One, I think most people, and possibly rightly so, would say this is the much nicer looking phone. The build quality is pretty fantastic with the old aluminium block. It just generally looks a beautiful phone. The two speakers give it a nice look, kind of framing the screen. I think possibly we don't quite get the same. The bezel's slightly thicker than on the S4. Now, I'm not a big fan of these buttons. I pointed them out in my review. They're a bit too flush. I know there's been times I've been trying to feel for the volume, and I'm not sure I'm pressing it or not. So it kind of helps aesthetically that they're really flush. You don't really notice them. It looks like just like a solid block, but it can be a bit of a pain trying to find them. There's also times, and maybe it's more just me when I'm filming reviews and things, that I'm trying to pick the phone device up like so, and I'm pressing the power button by mistake. And there's other times I'm trying to find the power button, and I'm trying to turn it on and hold it for a few seconds, and I'm not actually sure that I'm pressing it or not. But there's no denying. I mean, I saw I think it was Marcus Brownlee trying to really giving it some. If I flex that, that's a pretty solid. Yeah, it still work. I didn't break it. That's a pretty solid. It's going to take something special to be able to break that. Whereas, a lot of people aren't a fan of the plasticky Samsung approach. I think I marked that this morning. I dropped it. Anyway, there is a bit of creaking and groaning as you try and flex this device, but at the same time, I still feel it feels quite solid. I don't think there's much danger of you actually damaging it. It has got amazingly thin bezels. If we sort of compare some of the things that we just looked at with the One, amazingly thin bezels around the edge of the screen, right up to the very edge. The buttons do stick out just that little bit more. You can feel them that a little bit easier. Now, for me, I love the home button. I know a lot of people, they prefer on-screen buttons, but I like being able to wake my device up with that. It's so much easier than trying to find the power button on the top of the HTC One. Again, if we talk about buttons, for me, I'm finding it quite annoying with just a back and a home. The menu button, as you saw there, should obviously be built into the different apps. Can you see that? Don't know if it's showing up on the. So as we saw on my video of the 3D Mark, the menu button took away a good, I don't know how many pixels it would be, but kind of half a centimetre of the screen. It made the screen look pretty tiny in comparison. One thing you will notice though, from the sort of the downside of the sort of build, I don't really want to say build quality, but the materials used, is that the HTC, it does feel a heavier device. The S4, although I believe it's only about 10 grams in it, the S4 does feel kind of lighter and thinner. The only other, for me, downside to the HTC One, you kind of saw it slightly there, that it rocks. So if I like sometimes putting the phone on a surface, and I'll perhaps be tapping away at it, maybe a calculator or whatever, and it rocks about on that. The S4 is not perfect. It still has a bit of movement, especially on that side, but that's better to type on. And so just a small thing there. So if we move on to talk about kind of the internals of the devices, they're both very similar, sort of processor wise, quad core, but somehow the HTC One just feels slicker. I mean, as we move through, you can see right now there's not really any lag. That's generally really very slick. Okay, now the S4 has been off for a couple of minutes, and it's normally when I wake it and try and use it straight away that I notice that it seems to lag a bit. So let's just see. Having said that, that's still generally pretty slick. But not quite as slick as the HTC One. I don't feel. I mean, that's not been the best example. There are sometimes you notice it a lot more than that. So we look at speed of the device. I have to give the edge to the HTC One. It does generally feel slicker than the Galaxy. Then if we talk about software itself, we've got a lot of sort of, let's see, Samsung Hub, Samsung S Planner, S Memo, S Translator, S Voice, S Health. I've seen a couple of people say they really enjoy the S Health. I've not really, I mean, I used a pedometer at one point. I've put in a couple of bits and pieces of things I've eaten. I don't really see that it's any different to an app you can download off the store. Then we have sort of air view and all these things where we can kind of hover over the screen. Now the problem there being, not many apps use it. If I can remember Alphabet, if we go Flipboard. So generally it's some of the Samsung apps and Flipboard. So if I hover over, I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this. So hover over, my finger's not touching. Don't know how well I can show you. There you go. Quite a big gap in fact there. So it's pretty clever stuff, and I guess if more apps make use of it, it could be kind of cool. But as it stands, so what was the other one I was using? There was a Samsung, I think it was a video app of some kind. But as it stands, it's pretty useless. TouchWiz itself, I mean, I don't mind it too much. It's a bit, I find it a bit plain, a bit dull. It's got some pretty useful features, like the whole swipe right to dial somebody, swipe left to text them. So that's something I do quite like. But it's not all that well presented. So actually a good example of sort of TouchWiz versus Sense. So we go into the timer, I touch the timer, I punch in the minutes. Yeah, start, and off we go. So it's functional. And that's fine. Like, you know, you could argue function is all you really need. You go into the HTC One, I get spinny dials. Ooh. So, I mean, it could actually be, you know, if you've got to get to 30, well, okay, that's pretty quick, because it does stop on the next 10 minutes. But you could argue you can do that a couple of seconds quicker, boom, and you're done. So, HTC and Sense generally is nicer looking. You know, you look at that generally, I think, I mean, obviously each to their own, but I think the Sense version just looks that little bit prettier than TouchWiz. So, you know, it's a personal choice I suppose, but Sense does still have a bit of the edge. It's definitely a slicker, which is odd. I mean, a lot of people would have said going back in time, HTC Sense slows your phone down, but these days, or in this particular instance, the HTC One generally is the slicker device. So I moved on to software somehow, and I hadn't even finished talking about the hardware. Now I've left them both laying there like that, so you can see the difference between the screens. They're both on auto brightness. In fact, the S4 is on auto brightness with the slider up to the top, so the brighter. If I move it down to the dollar auto brightness, you know, this difference between the screens is really quite stunning when you put them side by side. One on its own, you know, if I'm operating my S4, no problem at all. I can see that perfectly clear. It's not like it's so dark I can't see, and it looks, on its own, it looks fine. Bring in the HTC One next to it, and you think, my God, the difference is amazing. And let's just double check, because actually, tell a lie, I might have this brightness turned up, because I often do when I'm using it for. So let's go back to, yeah, it is turned right there, but still, if we come back, you'll see it's not really a great deal of difference. Now, on the one hand, that makes you think, well, the screen burns a lot of battery. When you're showing it that bright, that's not a good thing. And I have noticed the battery on the Samsung does seem a bit better than on the HTC One, and perhaps that's part of it. Even with the auto brightness on, that's still a pretty bright screen, and I've no way of controlling that. I do like on the S4 that you do get the slider, so if you're wanting to sort of save battery and conserve, you can slide the auto brightness down, and that still means, I don't know if I'll be able to. There, you see how that dimmed even more? So it still is auto brightness, and it will still adjust to the surroundings. There you go. But you get to sort of set that center point for the auto brightness to work off. But having said that, I do think the HTC One screen, it does look better. It's a purer white. It's a cleaner white. Again, not that if you're just looking at the S4, you wouldn't even notice, to be honest, until your mate rocks up with his HTC One and is showing you something, and you perhaps realise, oh, my screen looks a bit dim. Even if we turn auto brightness off, so that's now on full brightness. Actually, that is probably looks very. I can see looking at the screen that does look quite bright on the video. So maybe it's just an auto brightness thing, and they need to be able to push it out a little bit further for you on the auto brightness. Then we have the speakers. Now, if you haven't seen it, go and see my comparison video, where I'm not going to do the whole comparisons again, but the speakers on the HTC One, something else. When it comes to a smartphone, I don't think there's anything else out there that even comes close. I will actually give you just a quick demo.
The overall electricity supply less efficient and creates undesired effects in other grid areas. Meanwhile, local distribution companies are
now, again, you'll see if you watch my comparison video, actually the volume, possibly the volume on the S4 is slightly louder.
Real quick, probably well, maybe not the last time that we talked about I/O, but if you are going to I/O,
but just the rounded sound from the HTC One is amazing.
I bet my old man will be so proud of me. Sorry, Pops, you.
Again, that might not come across so well in the video, but I can tell you that it just sounds amazing, really. Yeah. Not that you're going to be holding parties and using your HTC One as a DJ, but that's quite acceptable sound if you're just sat at your computer and you want to play some tunes. You hit play, you get a little bit of bass, you get a nicely rounded volume. It's the one thing that's really making me think I might stick with the HTC One. Now, having said that, I don't listen to a lot of music. It's more about podcasts, and the S4 is the first device that's passed my kettle test. So when I go downstairs in the morning, I put the kettle on to make myself a coffee, and I'm listening to my podcasts. Most times I either have to connect my phone to an external speaker, like a Bluetooth speaker, or I just pause it, or I just accept that I can't hear it while the kettle's boiling. The S4 is actually the first device where I can still hear the podcast while my kettle is boiling, bubbling away and boiling. So, yes, the speakers are amazing on the HTC One, but because I don't listen to music, it's more about podcasts. Actually, perhaps the S4 is the better device in that respect. So I'm just going to touch on now the cameras. To me, they're very important. I do like taking lots of pictures. So the camera, sort of the camera app and the camera itself, very important to me. Now, the biggest problem I found with the HTC One is just it seems a bit slow or a bit inconsistent when it comes to focusing. Now, it's managed to focus fine there, actually. Take a picture, no problem at all. When you tap on the screen, it generally does a fine job of focusing. I don't know if you can see that it is bouncing in and out a little bit of focus. So if I change, oh, I say that and then it goes nice and steady. Now I should point out, I'm convinced that I've got a faulty HTC One. The biggest reason being, in a sort of pitch black room, when you touch the focus, the flash should light up to enable it to focus. You can then go ahead and take your picture. Mine doesn't do that. You touch the focus and it tries to focus in next to no light, then you hit the button to take a picture and it basically just takes the picture and you're left with a blurry old photo. Now, one thing I like is HTC Zoe. There we go, Zoe's on. I'm not going to go through all the detail of what it does, but I've got a video on how to remove objects with HTC Zoe, and it's very simple. But bottom line, when I take a picture, it takes sort of 20 photos in a sequence. When I take a picture, now that was actually a photo rather than video, but you could see there was sort of movement and such in it. You then get to do various funky different edits. Again, there's a different video on that, so I'll leave you to have a look at that. But Zoe does seem sort of quite a simple, quite an easy way of editing photos, removing objects. I mean, the object remover does look really quite powerful. Have a look at the video. So, problem for me, just the kind of inconsistency. Look at the video comparison, as in the filming from the two phones. I literally held them both, sort of like so, filmed away, and you'll see the HTC One really struggle. It doesn't even bother focusing sometimes, and because I don't really see it at the time, so I'm not knowing that I need to tap to focus. It just looks pretty terrible. Some people are quite upset that I posted the video saying that you've got all the settings wrong, you've not even tried to focus. But you know, that's what it gives you. Now, one thing I tell you straight away, we get a slightly more zoomed image. So the HTC One has a slightly wider angle, and to be fair, the S4 is kind of bouncing in and out of focus a bit because it's not hugely well lit at the moment in my room. But generally, no problems at all. Now, what I do quite like is the interface. So we get to change between all these different options. So eraser. Now, the thing I found with some of these, I've not really been able to do any tests. I tried to take some pictures of things like drama mode, where it basically takes, if someone's like, well, as you can see in that image there, so that's one guy doing one jump on his snowboard, but it sort of takes a whole bunch of pictures and it picks out the best ones to sort of show this dramatic sort of movement. But then as I tried to do that as a car was passing by, for example, just to get an idea of how it worked, it will often put up messages, oh, it's not big enough in the, you know, move close to the object, or, you know, it's just not quite as simple. The sound and shot actually sounds like quite a good idea. It takes a picture and it takes some audio that attaches to the photo, but it's only usable within the phone, I believe. I don't think that's any use anywhere else. Best face. So there's lots of quite clever sounding extras. The HDR photos look pretty good, and like I said, I just generally quite like the interface. And all in all, and I like that Samsung have now finally done the film. I don't think they had this before. Film and photo, like HTC do, on the same thing. You don't have to switch between one mode to. You just go, right, I want to film, now I want to take a photo. I can't really do a camera test for you as I say right now, but I will try and perhaps get one done at some point in the near future. Most people's opinion is the S4 does have a better camera. The S4 has obviously the 13 megapixel camera. The HTC One has the 4 megapixel ultra pixel, should I say. So as I say, most people do, and I think I would tend to agree the S4 does have the slightly better camera, but if you're going to be using it in dark conditions, that's where the HTC One really shines. It is much better in darker conditions. If I can get this swapped, I'll have a better idea of what the camera's like. When I say swapped, I'm hoping HTC will be able to either fix it or replace it for me. And if I can do that, then I'll hopefully I'll be able to do a better comparison of the cameras. So the only other thing I should point out really is that I suppose Android 4.1.2, Android 4.2.2 might not mean anything to some people, proper hardcore Android fans, but oh, I need to have 4.2. And I suppose the only other thing to mention as well, kind of disappointing in some ways, because HTC used to have in the drop down bar, now these I've had to install those bits myself, the quick toggles, because HTC doesn't have them anymore. which seems kind of weird. Samsung, on the other hand, do have them kind of, you know, by default on their stock ROM, and even to the fact that you can edit which toggles you want in there quite simply, or you can have access to all toggles quite simply as well. So yeah, that's a bit of a downer. And then again, something that's very important to some people: fixed storage space, expandable storage space, fixed battery, replaceable battery. Again, to some people that's really, really important. To me, not so much. I do like that I can swap batteries, and I do like that I can swap SD cards or just expand the memory in the S4, but I wouldn't say that's a deal breaker, but I'm aware it might well be for some people. And while I mentioned battery life, I'll give you some examples with the S4. Probably the best battery life I've had out of a phone. So I went to work, 8 to 9 hour shift, got home, I still had 67% of battery left. Usually the best I've had perhaps 60%. Most phones kind of down to 40%. Now I'm not a heavy user at work, it's just now and then I'm checking my calendar, I'm adding it to a to-do list or two. So the screen on time probably only about an hour, so I'm not saying, you know, it's huge. And there might even be some Note 2 users out there saying, rubbish, I do much better than that. Fine, I haven't had a Note 2, so I'm just kind of commenting on what I've used. And the S4 has had fantastic, I mean, even at the very end of the day, 15 hours, I think it was still at sort of around 50% battery life, and that's kind of normal use for me. The HTC One also had, you know, has given me good battery life, not quite as good as 67% after I'd done my day's work, maybe around the 60 mark or a little bit higher perhaps. But generally both of them, they do, you know, I think the manufacturers have realised that battery life is a very important thing for people. So even though they've got these beefy quad-core processors and huge 1080p screens, they're realising, right, we've got to do something with the battery to be able to power these things. So the S4 has a 2600 milliamp hours. I think it was 2300, I forget now off the top of my head, inside the HTC One. So they're much better. You know, you look back to HTC's Desire HD, which I think had a 1350 milliamp hour. So, you know, twice as much battery power in the S4. So, which is the device for you? I can't tell you. The speakers are amazing, the design is amazing, and on some way on paper everything points to the HTC One. The software is perhaps a little better, it's a slightly slicker device, but then the S4, removable battery, onboard memory, SD card slot, sorry. I do like the design of the S4. You could say it's a down point that it looks so much like an S3, and I think initially I probably couldn't have told the difference. But I'm kind of getting used to, I mean, it's unfortunate, it's almost iPhone-y, sort of, the sort of band, and it's a bit more of a rectangular block, a rectangle with its rounded corners, as iPhone have patented. But there's certain things that just annoy me. I think the HTC One has got some fantastic strengths, but it's also got some things that will annoy people and that annoy me, like the buttons that I can hardly feel, like the no home button, and there's only just two buttons, a back and a home key. And I think those kind of things annoy me too much. Slap a home key on there and make the buttons a bit more usable and give me a consistent camera. I think the HTC One's probably quite an easy choice, even with the sort of fixed battery and no SD card slot. As it stands, I don't know, I'm leaning towards the Samsung myself, but yeah, I mean, it's such a tough decision. I don't think we've had such a tough decision when it comes to Android phones for quite some time. Hopefully, I know I've waffled on a lot more than I meant to, but hopefully this video gives you some help on helping you decide which device is the one for you. I'd be interested to know which you prefer. I guess in some ways more interestingly for the people that haven't got one of them yet, because if you've bought one you tend to have a vested interest on, oh yeah, this phone's better because I bought it. You don't want to admit saying, I bought the wrong one. So preferably from those that haven't yet bought, what your thoughts are and which one you're going to go for. So, like I say, sorry I've waffled on so much. My name's Andy. I'll catch you all again soon.